Hi guys, welcome to the Revive Stronger podcast. It's me, Steve Hall, your host as always, and today I'm very excited to have Valentin Tambosi on the podcast. I think a lot of our audience will be aware of Valentin. He is kind of quite notorious within kind of the natural bodybuilding scene, even unnatural, just bodybuilding in general. But if you aren't aware who Valentin is, I think I probably first came across Val from Cliff as one of Cliff's clients, and Val has then kind of broadened horizons and kind of made me see even more from his own coaching perspective and what he does. And he is a pro natural bodybuilder and a coach. He is a speaker at Intelligent Strength and trains out of Das Gym in Vienna, which is one of the top gyms in the world. And it's certainly a gym I have on my kind of to-do list to get there at some point. And is there anything else you want to let the listeners know about you, Val?
No, I think that was a very good intro, man. Thank you so much. I hope I can deliver some good information today.
Awesome. So I think we were just talking off air, and unfortunately we're a little bit delayed recording this because Val actually ended up dropping a really heavy dumbbell on his toe and was having to ice it, and it was in quite a lot of pain. But we were talking about how bodybuilding is great because despite being injured or having something not quite there, you can still make progress. And I think some people let these things set them back too far. And I think it would just be nice for a lot of the listeners to hear about kind of how did you handle the big toe and what was your perspective on it? Because I think a lot of time people get injured and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to throw in the towel. My season's over if they're like competing or whatever it might be. So yeah, take the floor, Val.
Yeah. All right. So I think a lot of things, especially with bodybuilding, is just mindset. And the way we think about things, the way we approach things can turn things around very quickly. So around 2.5 weeks ago, I dropped the 30 kg dumbbell on my big toe. And while that was very unfortunate and the bro is broken, I went back to the gym like 72 hours later and did a pull session. And then 2 days later, I did a squatting session. So that worked fine not because of my magical healing powers or because I did anything special with supplementation or anything. I just iced the toe like you just mentioned. But it was simply me approaching the whole thing. Well, I can barely walk, but I can still squat, and I can see and try if I can squat with this toe. And at the same time, I was getting a new perspective, what my squatting technique is like, and it was like a blessing in disguise because in the past I used to put too much pressure through my big toe into the ground when I was squatting, especially with my left leg. So that was the perfect opportunity to actually distribute more force through my heel when I was squatting. So it basically took the toe not as a crutch or anything, but basically as a starting point for like approaching it with a new mindset and turning a negative into a positive. So I think with every injury, and that smaller nagging injuries before, like elbow or shoulder, like stuff everybody I think has at a certain time in their lifting career, I always looked at these things to learn more about the cause, to learn more about the problem and solve that problem through basically knowledge and learning more about it. I think that is a fantastic, fantastic way to approach things, because every time you feel like sorry for yourself, you just answer it with, okay, I got to learn more about this. I gotta find out why this is happening. Why are people constantly having this issue or that issue? Well, figure it out, and probably the issue won't come as frequently as it's currently occurring. So this is just a mindset I think you can adapt with so many different things, whether you are doing a cut, whether doing a prep like you, Steve, or if it's like a stalling lift or whatever is not going your way. If you just adjust your mindset and look at it, okay, I have a problem here and I have to solve that problem. That is something very enriching, and that can be a lot of fun. And that was the case with the toe, actually. I'm not too worried about the toe anymore. I can squat, I can pull, I can do all these things. So now I just have to be patient and make sure it's 100% so I can basically walk again. That's the only thing I cannot do currently.
Yeah, bodybuilders, we don't need to walk or run. We just need to get ourselves into lifting positions and we're all good. So
absolutely.
I love that perspective because it's like finding the silver lining, and it's also what makes a lot of the coaches, the best coaches, are often the ones who have gone through the most hardships. They've had to troubleshoot for themselves. And then, I mean, the best coaches are the ones who can troubleshoot scenarios the best. So whilst a broken toe might not happen that frequently to a client, like an injury to the foot, that's something that is probably going to happen to a lot of people during their training career. So how did the drop on the toe come about, by the way? I'm guessing that's not something you could have prevented.
I could have actually. So I did a push session and I just placed the dumbbells on a decline bench and I made sure they don't roll off. I always place them there. But what I didn't account for is that the lower dumbbell that I placed lower on the bench started to slide very slowly. And I was standing at the end of the bench talking to somebody. And all of a sudden I heard like the dumbbell drop. And unfortunately it dropped exactly with the edge of the dumbbell on my big toe. So it was not rolling off to the side. It was slowly sliding. And that was the problem. So yeah, it was 100% my own fault.
Damn. Yeah, I think these lapses, they're so easy to happen. So I guess it's just that it's always a constant reminder of, okay, just take extra care and moving through the gym. So to actually talk about our first topic, because like I said, Valentin is a natural pro bodybuilder. He has a really cool competitive history, and his competition prep with Cliff was something that I really enjoyed watching and viewing. And I don't think you've talked about it in huge amounts of depth, at least for quite a while. So I think it'd be really cool to hear you looking back at it now and talking about, first of all, let people know how you did, and then maybe talking through some of the biggest lessons and challenges that you're going to take away. And again, like being a bodybuilder, you're not letting those kind of mistakes, or if there were mistakes, hold you back. You're learning to become better in future from them.
For sure, man. So I want to start right at the beginning. So just a brief intro to my 2017 season would be my 2014 season, which was just a one-show season. Because back then I didn't know it's usual or common for natural bodybuilders to do numerous shows. Back then, I didn't know natural bodybuilding existed, to be honest. So back then I did an untested show in the NABA, Austria. It was the NABA Austrian Open right here in Vienna. And I prepped 20 weeks for that show. I went from 90 kg to 77 kg, and I was not at a great starting point. And at the end, I wasn't in great condition on stage. So lesson number one, give yourself enough time. And leading up to the 2017 season, obviously educated myself regarding natural bodybuilding. I learned, wow, there's an entire industry. There's different federations. There's different people being active in these tested competitions. And I just wanted to join that, obviously, because I wanted to see how I stack up against other natural athletes. So I started, compared to 2014, I made my second mistake, or lesson number two. I started the prep too lean. Yes, that's also possible. Because back then I just wanted to make sure Cliff has a fantastic starting point to work off with. And I just wanted to impress him with the condition that came to him when we started our collaboration. So that was November 2016. And the first show was at the end of April. And I was 83 kg at the beginning of prep compared to the 90 kg back in 2014, which should give people serve as a small reminder how much progress you're going to make as a natural athlete in between years. So I got lighter and lighter, but I actually got more muscular. And from there, I quickly realized at the midpoint around February, beginning of March, that I was probably too lean at the beginning of prep, because certain things just occurred, like my sleep was going downhill very, very quickly. Like I already had slight sleep issues before I entered prep, which just told me, yes, I was in a surplus, but it was probably not my sweet spot. It was not that big of a surplus needed for me to go at a 100% into prep. So I did my first show, or my second overall show of my competitive career in Chicago. It was an IMBA show. This is where I took my natural pro card. And then I did another show, which was basically the big show at the end of May. It was the German Championships, which is, the GmbF is a fantastic federation. It is very big. I had 21 guys in my class, and I took third there. And in between shows, I already realized that I lose some fullness, some level of tissue was being lost there. And it's definitely to the length of prep, and also probably to how we arranged some things with refeeds and diet breaks and all that stuff. We can go into that a bit later. But all the things I did wrong with the first prep, I did right with the second prep, but I introduced new mistakes with the second prep. So after that show at the end of May, I decided together with Cliff to do my first pro show in the States at the IPE Windy City Natural. And it was mid-August. So I had to hold condition from end of May until mid-August, which was my decision, and was a bad decision, because we did not set up nutrition in a way that allowed me to recover from the previous dieting months. So all the accumulative fatigue I got from all these months of dieting and being in a deficit and already starting very lean into the diet completely killed me. So the months of June and July were very hard, and out of nowhere, basically overnight, I had adherence issues. I never had that before during a diet. So I had huge adherence issues. Just being like 200 calories over my macros, being 150 calories over, like every single day. I never was able to nail a day. And if I nail it, the next day I would be back to being completely off. So that was completely new to me. And probably the biggest setback for me back then was that I didn't notice myself in my actions. Basically, I was doing stuff I did not want to do and stuff that did not like resonate what I'm usually about when it comes to dieting, when it comes to prep, when it comes to bodybuilding. So yeah, that's a brief overview of that between 2014 and 17.
That brings so many thoughts into my mind, partly because I wonder, because I don't think I'd heard about you describe it in the way you had just there in terms of the context of your first show as well, only because I did a very similar thing with my first show. I started like a lot heavy. I know my weights in pounds, but very similar. I started much heavier, had to lose a lot more weight. Whereas then for my second shows or second season, which was 2014, 2017 as well, I ended up starting really quite lean. And the only thing I had to do was I like dieted 2 months. And then I was like, right, I'm actually going to have to go into like a maintenance period for 2 months and then start dieting again, which wasn't ideal either, but maybe slightly better than just dieting straight through. But something you mentioned there is, and people who know you, Val, like you're someone who ticks boxes, you're very dedicated, very consistent, like a lot of bodybuilders are. And I recently had James Krieger on the podcast, and we were talking about diet breaks and the fact that a lot of the time they're just psychological. And I think a lot of bodybuilders think they kind of poo-poo the psychology. They're like, I can go through that. But you just said there where like you'd effectively kind of been a bit of a robot and it was never an issue for you. And I wonder if actually, whilst we think we're a bit invincible with our psychology, there's sometimes we've only got a certain bandwidth that we can work with. And if we haven't got periods of time where we're eating up or something, it can just break us a bit too soon. I don't know if that's something in hindsight you've looked at where you'd now implement more periods of maybe having breaks.
100%. I think the way we look at these things, especially, I mean, you talk about psychology, and it's definitely with everything. It's a character thing. It's also like a psychology thing. So you have a lot of people in bodybuilding that are very, very dedicated, yes, but with that dedication comes some sense of recklessness. They're like, I can do anything. I can just punch through this. I can power through this. And I can guarantee you, a deficit that is long enough can break everybody. It doesn't matter how dedicated you are. It doesn't matter how hardcore you are. Sooner or later, that deficit will absolutely destroy you. Yeah, especially if you don't have any kind of hormonal support or anything. It's just going downhill. So you can't really do anything about that. So you have to be smart about it. You have to make smart decisions, and you have to plan accordingly. And that is one thing that I definitely learned, especially how I prep people now, is how we implement refeeds, how we implement diet breaks, when we implement them, strategically looking at the shows and then implementing the diet break depending on the shows we're doing makes a huge difference. Not just how people go through prep, but also when they're done with prep, how they're feeling, how quickly are they back to normal. I have guys that feel back to normal within 4 to 6 weeks after an entire season where they did like 3 shows and they've been dieting for 6 to 7 months. And I'm like, well, I did the same thing. Well, it was a bit longer, but I did the same thing. I didn't feel normal for 6 months after my shows. So that is a long, long period of time, and it's not necessary. I'm not saying you're going to be back to normal in 1 or 2 weeks and there's no rebound phase or anything, but you are going to be in a much better position if you think about these things beforehand and how you manage fatigue, how you take care of the deficit as you are prepping and as you are selecting shows, definitely.
I love that. I think it's more commonly thought as like diet breaks can be helpful for especially like general pop because it gets them to practice like maintenance, because after they've lost the weight, oftentimes, especially like we talk about gen pop, but they could be very serious. They struggle to maintain it. So it gives them practice kind of being in a dieted state, but then kind of still breaking their diet, but just at maintenance. And I think even bodybuilders can appreciate from that because, I mean, like you said, a lot of guys, if they've just gone, like you said, they've just kind of brute force gone through an entire diet, maybe they have been able to adhere, but post-show, doesn't always look very pretty. Whereas if you have been able to kind of had those practices at maintenance, post-show becomes a lot more manageable, because you're like, oh, I've done that before. I can increase, like, and you're in a surplus at that point, and still people struggle. But it's far more manageable when you've had those periods of like pit stops to be able to kind of refuel and gather what kind of normality is slightly like.
Absolutely. And also like explaining to your clients that these little pit stops are very valuable. It's like this little island of safety where you're at, and from there you can take another swim. Because if you're constantly in the deficit, if you're constantly trying to force things, sooner or later you're just going to run into a wall. It's the same with training. It's the same with a deficit. It's the same with nutrition. So if you're already planning long term for a natural bodybuilding season, include all these things, because it's gonna make everything so much better. And especially as far as the maintenance of muscle tissue goes, these things help tremendously. I think, if we one day can get like research on this stuff, that will be absolutely spectacular, where we look at like a diet for a competition that goes like for 6 months and the other one goes for 6 months, but with implemented diet breaks, and who then maintains more muscle tissue. That would be absolutely fantastic. I mean, this is a very complicated topic because the study design is almost impossible, but this is the type of stuff that I think makes a huge difference when you then see the final product on stage, how the person is looking, how they are comparing to the other competitors who are probably not implementing diet breaks and are just going straight through from the start of the prep to stage in a calorie deficit. And the only thing they get is the peak week with some refeeds there. So I think if we're already approaching things so strategically with natural bodybuilding that by now everybody's prepping longer and longer, which is great, we also have to implement and talk about these breaks and these phases when not much is happening. And that is fine, because that potentiates the next phase.
Love that. And I think, it's kind of like, I think it's only becoming more and more apparent how much we're drawing from things like powerlifting, where we're thinking about periodization, and now we're like, okay, dietary periodization is becoming more important. We have to be a bit strategic as a bodybuilder. You can't just go kind of all guns blazing, especially I think maybe as a natural, like you said, we haven't got anything we can't just chuck in a bit of extra drug to bring up a certain hormone or whatever. So these periods of time, like nutrition is just such a powerful tool for us. Do you have any kind of general guidelines in terms of how you like to do diet breaks, where you place them with clients? I'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. I think it ties right into how we structure a training week, how we structure a microcycle. What I've been doing for a few years now is when we deload, we just take 3 to 4 days off, depending on some clients, even 5 days. And I think we messaged about this, where you obviously just take a full deload week where you still have some exercises in there, where you just work on movement quality and all that stuff, but just with reduced intensity and reduced volume, obviously. So I've came to the conclusion that it's very, very suited for a lot of clients, especially the way we approach training, that they just get time off from the gym completely. Now, obviously, they're going to feel a bit rusty with certain movements when they come back into training. But then again, we're not performing a highly technical lift like a snatch or a clean and jerk. We're doing a squat. We're doing an RDL. These things, once you have mastered them, are very easy to maintain technique-wise. So during those times, depending on how long the person is off from the gym, I implement the refeeds. I implement my diet break. So depending on the client, it can last into the next microcycle, or it's just reduced to those deload days where we take off completely from the gym. And there's different approaches to this. I mean, some people I overfeed more on certain days, others are pretty on maintenance calories. It really depends on the context and the client, but this is how I approach things. And I've always also done refeed or diet breaks with clients for an entire week, where we basically just go, okay, we have 3 or 4 days off from the gym, and we take that diet break into the next microcycle with 3 additional days of overfeeding.
Brilliant. And out of interest, in terms of the deloads, how, I guess, are those auto-regulated, and when do they tend to land for your competitors?
We're not auto-regulating them. I used to do that, but I've noticed the stronger and the more muscular the client, the more proactive our thinking has to be. Because I don't want a client to run into a wall and then we deload, because that would be closest to the auto-regulative approach. So basically we do it every 3 to 5 weeks. I think as far as timeframes goes, all of these things fall similarly to what you are doing with clients. and what a lot of the sports literature is telling us to do with periodization and how we should approach like a microcycle and a mesocycle. So it's every 3 to 5 weeks, and depending on certain other markers like sleep or performance and just subjective feel during the day, we might take the diet break and put it somewhere else. Right. I mean, it could be a day before we start deloading. It could be a day after. It depends on different things, but we just are flexible with it. But they are definitely part of the whole thing, of the entire structure, how we see the prep. I think it's just a very bad idea to have a deload where you're reducing the training stimulus and you're also reducing calorie intake. That just calls for muscle tissue loss. Like, you have basically, I always explain it like this to people, you have basically 2 buttons you can press that induce anabolism. And the one is nutrition, a calorie surplus, and the other one is a training stimulus. So if none of these buttons are being pushed, you are in trouble. So you want to make sure one of these buttons is always on when you are in a severe deficit or in a long-term prep.
Cool. Yeah, I think it definitely makes a lot of sense. And you're completely right. That is a lot of my kind of preferred way to do it. And yeah, with the muscle loss scenario, it's very interesting because I guess I've talked back and forth a bit with Pascal about it, and he has had less, I guess, preferred, or his experience with diet breaks hasn't been as good as mine has. So I've done it with clients, been super successful myself, always found it really great, but his hasn't been quite there. Have you ever found clients take a diet break and maybe it pushes them in the wrong direction, like to maybe overfeed too much, they end up binging, or it just breaks up their momentum so much that you almost consider, is this even worthwhile? Or how do you then, if you, obviously it's ideal that you want to take it, how do you get them in a position where actually this is someone who typically doesn't do well with them, but now we've changed these, we've modified it so they now kind of get the most out of the diet break?
I think it's very important to look at the magnitude of the diet break. How long does the diet break take? And what if we play around with just slight adjustments? Like if we're usually doing a 7-day diet break, what happens if we bring it down to 5? Is the client just too long in a surplus or too long at maintenance with those 7 days that they just completely lose the mindset for prep? What if we just shorten that and then jump right back into the deficit? I mean, not everybody needs exactly 7 days. This is the same thing with other variables where we just throw in a number and say that's the right number. Well, it's maybe 5 days, maybe it's 9 days. I mean, I know people that do 14-day diet breaks and benefit greatly from them, and then have a very aggressive phase again and then do a 14-day diet break again. We just have to look for different variables and look out for different variables, and also just make sure as you're working with that person, as you're collecting data, you want to implement all these things you're learning about the person and just things you observe. How is your sleep? How is your performance? How is your subjective feel? All these things play a large role. As far as Pascal and not being that big of a fan of diet breaks, I think it's very much how you think about the diet break itself, what you think is coming after the diet break and what it allows you to do long term. I think the longer the prep, the more you're going to appreciate a diet break.
Cool. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that holds true with the consensus within the industry as well, which is nice because you are specifically working with the people that we're trying to, a lot of us are trying to apply this to. So the fact that, someone with a lot of experience has utilized these in such a successful approach and methodical way is actually incredibly refreshing to hear. So I kind of sidetracked because we're talking about you and now we've already jumped on to talking about your clients. But something I did want to talk about in terms of your own prep, do you think even with maybe breaks away, is there a period of time that's kind of talked about holding condition for too long? Do you think there's like a length of prep that even if you are having like ad hoc weeks at maintenance that's just too long, do you think you could just be dieting too long where actually there's kind of like I describe it as like there's just a period of time where you're kind of on fire and like trying to put it out with just a week-long diet break is not enough. You have to be away from that fire for a long period of time. Do you think there's such a case for that and condition to just get worse and worse and worse?
I think there is, but it's definitely different for everybody. And plus, one thing we also have to consider is you are getting better and better at dieting and at prepping the more often you do it. I always tell people dieting is like a skill. You have to diet a few times until you nail it every single time afterwards. Like, remember, you're like, let's remember your very first mini cut. Your last mini cut is probably way, way different than your very first mini cut, because just the execution, how you think about it, how you approach it is very, very different. You're just way more experienced. And also, as far as what your body is doing with a calorie deficit, your body just knows what is happening. It doesn't know what's going on when you do that for the very first time. I remember the difference between being in a deficit 2014 for my first prep and being in deficit 2017. It was very, very different. And we also see that on stage with competitors that have competed many, many times. The level of conditioning they achieve compared to a first timer is very, very different. And they're not doing things drastically different. Yeah. We could compare people that prepped for the same amount of time. I guarantee you the guy that has prepped numerous times before is going to bring better conditioning to the stage, simply because his body knows what is going to happen. His body is prepared for what is going to happen. But as far as putting a number on it, I think I've done like 30 weeks of dieting until my first show, 2017. And after that, things went downhill. I think if we can structure our competition so we are not 100% for the first competition and like 95% there for the second one and then peak for the last one, that would be perfect, because you want to be best at your final biggest competition. Like, let's say you do numerous qualifiers, you do 1 or 2 qualifiers, you want to be 90, 95% for the first 2 qualifiers and then nail it for the finals, obviously. That's where you have to be your best. You don't want to be your best at the first show and then things go downhill from there.
Yeah, I love that. I think people ended up maybe taking the longer preps a bit too far. And I think I'd heard the phrase, I may have even wrongly used it, now I'd say wrongly, that you can't peak too early. Like there's no such thing as being ready too early. And I think now that people have got a better understanding and handle of true competitive conditioning, there is such a thing as being ready too early, because we now understand actually how far we can take it. Because I'd say someone like, why can I only remember bathtub? I can't say that. I can't even say it. I want to say it. But Brett Freeman, he even said he could get leaner, but I think like pinnacle of kind of the level of leanness, there's not really much further than that. So if he's achieving that, you can certainly achieve that too soon and then kind of drag too later into things. So yeah, I think that's very well said in terms of like structuring and being, again, just periodizing and planning ahead of time. Kind of, I understood the approach of maybe not picking a show because like competing when your body's ready, but I think there's a limit to that, like you kind of mentioned with the fact that, yeah, you can take too long and kind of peak at the wrong times and not be ready where you want to be.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of saying in the past, you cannot peak too early, because by now I'm unconvinced you can. I've seen it numerous times. I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with other competitors. And one thing we often do, especially in natural bodybuilding, we think it's only about conditioning, and that conditioning is just a result of being leaner and leaner and leaner. That is not conditioning. Conditioning is like, some people say fullness or conditioning without fullness is not worth anything. And I tend to agree with that. The conditioning you bring out with all the muscle tissue you can maintain and just peaking perfectly is very, very different than the conditioning we just look very hungry, basically. So that's a huge difference. And that is definitely a product of timeframes and how you approach fatigue management within the prep. And yeah, I think the term peaking too early is not possible. It just came about because so many people are not in shape on stage. And obviously that is true too. But at the same time, the people that really think about all this stuff very often push the gas pedal too hard, and they just diet, and they diet themselves into the ground. And they could have probably looked better at 3 weeks out compared to 0 weeks out. So Brett is a fantastic example, because I saw him live at Worlds and he looked fantastic. And that level of conditioning only looks that great, and that level of conditioning is only achievable if you also bring the fullness. I think that term fullness is often laughed at, especially in natural bodybuilding. Well, what can be full about a 160-pound bodybuilder? Well, a lot. There's a huge difference if he's completely flat or if he brings the fullness and he's actually maintaining all his muscle tissue.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And I guess that's where, especially, I know he worked with Cliff, and Cliff's obviously well known for peaking, and that's where peaking really starts to make a difference. Again, people say peaking doesn't make that much of a difference, which might be true for majority, because majority don't get to the condition that is like pro, like Brett Freeman, where you need to have that level of kind of any kind of variable slightly off could lead to the look just not quite being where you want it to be. So
hey guys, hope you're enjoying the podcast. Just wanted to take one moment of your time to actually talk about our coaching services over at Revive Stronger. We at Revive Stronger, we offer an incredible premium personal coaching service just for people like you, and I know you will love it. Do you want to work with us? Here's what I need you to do. Head over to revivestronger.com. Go up to the coaching tab, click on online coaching. Once there, read through the requirements and what it takes to be an online client. Once finished, hit apply now and you're only one step away from applying to our services. Fill out the Google form and you're done. And that was basically it. A coach is going to reach out to you shortly, and then it's Team Revive Stronger.
I love that. And actually, you spoke about, initially we started off with your first prep. You felt like you were started maybe too heavy, and second prep, it was you started too light, too lean essentially. Is there an amount of leanness or like pounds or kilos above stage weight or percentage of body weight above like predicted stage weight that you ideally would have a person so that they haven't got like too much to lose, or obviously being way too lean and too close and maybe already in a fatigue state?
For sure. I thought about like percentages as far how much you want to be over stage weight. I got away from that because I think it's just better to guesstimate somebody's body fat percentage and go from there. And I think you want to be in the range of 15 to 16 for males. I think that is good. You don't want to start a prep at 20%. You have to do a mini cut before that. Otherwise, you're just running out of time. And the reason I don't like a certain percentage over stage weight is because I know people that can drop a lot of weight very, very quickly in the first 6 to 8 initial weeks of a prep, and others take it slowly right from the beginning, and the rate of loss does not change from week 26 to week 1. It's the same all the way through. But some other people, it just greatly fluctuates, and they lose very aggressively at the beginning, and they should if they can. And later on, it just slows down tremendously. So this is what I would be looking for with a client. And also, the biggest thing is just, okay, body fat distribution and how the person looks in pictures. This is one thing when people look at me now and they're like, wow, you only have to drop like 12 kilos to be on stage. I'm like, nope, I just have great body fat distribution. If I drop 5 kilos, I look the exact same. I don't look leaner. I don't look better. I look the exact same. Which, on the other hand, like it's great for off-season because you look so much leaner. But for a prep or a stage athlete, it's not great at all because I still know what number I have to be on stage in order to be conditioned. So my off-season weight doesn't tell other people a whole lot because the body fat distribution is so favorable that I always, in my off-season, look ready to start a prep, even though I'm not. So huge differences between individuals, and we have to look at the body fat percentage, guesstimate it, and from there just go and see how we plan out the prep. Excellent.
And I guess actually an interesting question then is, obviously you said, and I have actually experienced similar with clients, and I don't know the explanation behind it, but there's certain things I look at and I wonder if you look at the same, where you might have a target rate of loss in mind. So for example, like you said, like you'd expect out the gates, you can be a bit more aggressive, maybe closer to a 1% body weight loss per week, and then it slows down as you get leaner. And that's kind of theoretically what you'd want and expect. But you've had clients who maybe you've lost at like a slower pace and it's just continued, and maybe at points it looked too slow, other points it looked too fast. Are there things you're looking at past kind of the numbers that are giving you an indication that that's okay? What kind of indicators do you look for?
The biggest thing, and this is also the hardest thing to explain, is visual feedback. Because this is where some people are like wondering, what is this particular coach seeing when he looks at these pictures? And because some people just look at pictures and they're like, hey, I look the same. And you're like, no, you look significantly better from 4 weeks ago. And they ask you, well, how do you know that? And the thing you then have to explain to people is just not the number on the scale. Let's say somebody just loses 200 grams over 4 weeks and the target was like 600 grams. So, but the client looks significantly different. Well, there's different things that play part to that. Like it's how the muscle pushes against the skin. It's how the skin itself looks. I had an entire discussion with Cliff about how skin looks on certain competitors and what it tells you about the conditioning. It's all these little things that play into your decision making as well. And I absolutely hate that we cannot put a number on these things and just make them a trackable data point like weight or weight on the bar or whatever it may be. But this is also part of bodybuilding and being a bodybuilding coach. You have to look at these pictures for each individual client and know if they are better now or if they're worse now. And that may, to somebody else, that may doesn't make a whole lot of sense if they are not used to that client, how the client is looking. And this is what a lot of people would categorize as the eye, or having eyes for this particular client or for this particular sport, because this is part of it. You have to be able to tell, sometimes in horrible lighting, what clients are doing and if they're progressing at the rate you want them to progress. And as far as rate of loss goes, what I do with all clients before they start their preps, I have like a huge spreadsheet where we write down the shows and also the rate of loss. And the rate of loss we have to nail every week in order to be at this weight, the predicted stage weight, on show day number 1. So this obviously helps us to guide us through the prep and through the weeks, because now we know, hey, this week we have to lose 400 grams. And of course, we then don't know exactly if it's water weight or fat, or if some of it is, even muscle. But this helps us tremendously to just find the sweet spot every week, and if we are on pace for our predicted stage weight.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, that reminds me of Cliff brought up when we brought him over for the London seminar, and it really hit home, because I think there's scenarios at which maybe I've hoped for the whoosh to come, and there's been no whoosh, and it's been too long really since I should have made a change. And there's obviously the school of thought of, I mean, if you're doing everything right, you're ticking the boxes and the scale hasn't come down, maybe give it a week. But Cliff was very much a kind of, like you said, you panned out the weight. He was like, if there hasn't been the rate of loss that he wanted, he'll make a change, he'll make an adjustment. Are you very similar in that line of thought for contest prep? I guess you have a deadline, so the kind of waiting around, you just can't maybe take that risk.
You can't take that risk. And it really depends on how you communicate with your client, and just ask them, hey, do you have any idea why the weight stalled the way it did this week? And maybe the client is then telling you something you didn't know previously that affects your decision. But Cliff is absolutely right in saying that, hey, we have a deadline. There's a day where we step on stage, where we're getting compared. Nobody cares if we did not adjust when we should have adjusted our macros in week 16. So this is definitely something like it's an approach where a lot of people don't realize that you have a certain time frame available and you have to use that time frame. Like, nobody's going to reschedule the show for you. You have to make the day of the show, and you have to be conditioned for that day. So I like that approach, but I always communicate with the client asking me, hey, do you have any idea what is going on this week with your weight? Just simply asking them that question can make a huge difference. And all of a sudden they tell you about the sleep, they tell you about some private problem, whatever it may be. And then you go, okay, with all these information, maybe we will maintain macronutrients for the coming week, but just know that if by the midweek we have not solved this issue, we have to drop now.
Got you. Yeah, no, that makes really good sense. And that's actually refreshing, because it's something that I've started doing, is kind of that midweek, if they sound like they're in a stress position and maybe it's kind of that water retention being held, kind of that midweek check-in of kind of like, if we haven't dropped, then we're going to take it down. And sometimes I think they hate me and they're like, they don't want to check in that midweek because they're going to get that drop. But I guess it's that you kind of get that mindset of, well, you want to be ready for the show. So we want to kick this up a notch. So no, I appreciate all your thoughts on that. That's really interesting to hear about. And is there anything else from your previous kind of competitive history that you're going to be taking into, when are you next looking to compete? And is there any kind of lessons and things that you're going to do differently this time around?
Like, the more time passes without me stepping on stage, the more stuff I want to improve the next time, because the more time passes, you just have like a certain distance to the whole thing, and you're not looking at it as emotional as right after it. And I think that's a big thing. I initially plan on stepping on stage this year, but with work being very, very high last fall and traveling around for numerous shows, I decided to do another year of off season. So I'm going to be on stage 2021 and making sure everything until then is in place and I don't overwork myself to the same degree as I did 2019. It was a very good year for coaching. It was not a very good year for building muscle, especially the last 6 months of 2019. But all of these lessons can be looked at in a positive light, like we said at the beginning, if you just take the learning first. If you say, okay, I learned this out of that situation, and now I'm moving forward without looking at what I may have lost as far as time goes. I can always step on stage. The stage is always waiting for you. It doesn't matter if it's 2020, 2021, or 2022. The stage is always going to be there, and the better I set myself up for prep, the better I will look on stage. As far as what would I change for my next prep, I would probably be a bit more aggressive right at the beginning. And also, like I said, find the best mix of my first prep and my second prep. So I don't want to start too fat, and I also don't want to start too lean. I want to find that sweet spot and just make sure I then have combined that sweet spot of body fat percentage with the appropriate time of prep length for my first show, and also not peak for the first show. Like, very important, like peaking too early shall be avoided.
Yeah, I guess the great thing is once you're at the level you're at, you know you're competitive, so you don't need to think about doing your best. And credit to 2014, you thought only you people did one show. And I remember I competed in 2 organizations for my first year, and I was like, man, after this first show, can't I just like end it here? Just why am I competing again? And now you see people and they're doing multiple qualifiers for the same show, and I completely get it now because it's just more experience, and that can be very helpful. And if you have the ability, I mean, peaking that frequently might not always be the best thing for you, but if it works out, then I can completely see that. That's really cool. And actually on this line, this was one of my later questions, but it makes good sense to ask it here. You obviously train at Das Gym, and there's some amazing bodybuilders there. And obviously you're somewhat surrounded by guys who are a lot larger than you for specific reasons, because they've got some kind of enhancement there. Is there any kind of what's keeping you natural? And is there any kind of, have you got any kind of thoughts in where you might go in future?
Yeah, I will always stay natural. I never really considered anything else, to be honest. That always sounds like I'm not telling the truth, but I never really considered it for some reason. And actually, now that you ask me, I don't really know why. I think the biggest thing is just long-term health and not knowing what these actions would produce in like 10, 20, 30 years from now. I just want to know I'm in good health in 30 years from now. There's a time after stepping on stage. There's a time after competing. And I think you just allow for that time to be potentially much healthier if you stay natural long term. I mean, I definitely think about TRT when I'm older. I think that's fantastic for general health and overall health. But right now, as far as competing goes, I am very much only interested in the natural realm. Cool.
Yeah, that definitely sings true to my thoughts completely on the matter as well. It's kind of, and so many natural guys don't even make it to their kind of supposed limit that we don't even know what that is right now. So the kind of always the thought in my mind was like, oh, this is like extra progression and like I can keep eking out gains. It's kind of, well, damn, I'm probably never even going to realize my full potential. So I think that's a poor excuse on my behalf. So yeah, I respect the fact that you're kind of thinking about longevity and health. And I guess natural bodybuilding for you is fulfilling you and everything that you would want from it. And you don't need to kind of go down, nothing against it, but you don't need that kind of enhancement there.
Yeah, I agree. And another thing is, I think it potentially leads you to not think as deeply about nutrition and training, because so many other things work in your favor all of a sudden. And I think that is very detrimental to some people. This is why a lot of enhanced guys that I know say, hey, you guys know way more about nutrition and training than we do, because we just add this different variable and things just work out. It doesn't matter if we do this with nutrition or that with nutrition. I'm not saying these people don't think about that stuff, but they have a different approach to it. Obviously, everybody would, because of that added compound right there.
Yeah, you can even see this, and I always hate using. I mean, I hate using it, but it's such a true thing. Is you see guys who like are huge, they may well be natural, huge, very gifted, and then you look at how they're training. You hear them talking about their training. You hear them talking about their nutrition. You ask them questions, and you're kind of like, "This makes no sense. How are you this big?" And like genetics play equally such a big role, like having some enhancement on your side. It can make you underthink these things. So I think you're right in that naturals probably don't have that kind of safety net as such to be able to rely on, just like guys with like even worse genetics. Probably a lot of listeners here, if they're delving into as much detail as what we are, they're either really eager to get everything out of it, or maybe they struggle to get just anything from just basic advice and they have to take it to that next level.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing, I'm overwhelmed by how much information there's out there about nutrition, training, and recovery. I can barely keep up with all that information. If you add a fourth tool to all of this, that is very, very complicated. If you really think about this stuff, then I don't know what I would do because it's just not enough hours in the day to actually manage all this stuff and all that information.
It's actually fun. That reminds me, I was saying how I have a lot of respect for like very good vegan bodybuilders, because they have to think about a variable that if you eat meat, I mean, you're just ticking the box. If you're eating protein, it's an animal source. You don't have to worry so much. But vegans have to complementary proteins, all of this sort of thing. So again, like it's just similar steroids. You have to think about that other element that's coming in. And if you don't, then like you're not going to be putting your best foot forward. So I'm completely with you. I always said it's just too much to think about. I think about too many extra variables, like, and things as it is. I think just having that would just drive me up the wall and I'd be very anxious about everything. So yeah. To draw on obviously Das Gym, we already spoke about it and how great a gym it is, and something I have never had the kind of, I guess, blessing of is a huge range of equipment. I've always kind of, because of where I live, central London, there's just not a huge amount of good gyms. They're always like on the outskirts because it makes sense. Land's expensive. And so like you're never going to get the best gyms. So for bodybuilding, having such a huge range of equipment could be a blessing, but also do you sometimes struggle to actually select movements, and how do you select movements, and how is your exercise variation? Do you ever get tempted? I see you bringing in new machines all the time where it's like, I'm just going to drop this one in now, or I'm going to do an extra set on here because it's kind of a kid in a candy store, a bodybuilder in a kind of fantastic facility like your own.
It's very tempting, and the longer you train at the gym, the better you're going to get with all that equipment standing around you, and you're just not touching it because you're still progressing another lift, and that lift is working out well and is ticking all the boxes, so you don't need the other one. So it's definitely a question of, okay, what is my current training program looking like, and is my current training program working? Am I progressing? Is everything on pace where I want it to be? Because obviously, once you think about switching out an exercise, it is very tempting to just do less sets overall on this one machine and just add another machine. So the total amount of volume is the same, but you just add two new machines. That is definitely tricky, but I think I got that very well under control with all my clients, because I have numerous clients obviously training at this facility. And while we have a lot of great machines, people understand when I tell them that progress is king. Like, your progression is much more important than training on a completely new machine, because otherwise we would fall into the category of muscle confusion and trying to do something different with a muscle group every 4 weeks. And I don't think that is really necessary and should not be an option. So over time, you just also realize not all of the machines we have at Das Gym are fantastic for optimizing muscle hypertrophy. You have to say that. Some of these machines are simply in there because they have history. They are, like, we have some of the machines from Dorian Yates that he trained on at Temple Gym. They bought it last year, and now they are at Das Gym, which of course is fantastic. But some of these machines, I'm not particularly happy with them because they're not good machines. I don't fit in them. I don't like the profile. So some of these machines are just there because, hey, here's a machine Dorian Yates trained on. So it's more like, it's not just a gym, it's also a museum. And that's what Andy, the owner, really wants people to see. He wants to see there's different types of equipment in there. And I think that's, there should be some variation in there as far as the machines you have, but it shouldn't be like, you don't need 20 different chest machines. You need a few good ones. You need a few good ones with history, and there you go.
Awesome. And actually, in that line of thought, when are you changing movements, rotating them once they've stalled, or do you ever change it before it's stalling as it's slowing down? And how many variants for a muscle group do you tend to use?
Yeah, I am definitely in the camp of using a lift as long as possible until it stalls. And a stalling lift can have different phases, basically. Sometimes you can tell, hey, there's constantly technique breakdown occurring at this weight. We have to do something about it. Like, ideally switch it out, or do a reset where we drop the weight significantly and then look at your execution again, because we don't want that to break down to a significant degree. Or if we're constantly attempting the same weight and we're just not progressing our reps, we have to think about what is going wrong here. And depending on how long that person has already progressed that lift, that can mean, okay, we have progressed this lift for 6 months now. We have progressed it for 3 months now. You are already at a very high training level. It is unrealistic to expect you're constantly progressing something like a bench press, something like a squat, something like an RDL, because sooner or later you will be world champion at everything. And that's not going to happen. So we have to think intelligently about different variables like training level, strength levels of that person, and how long we are already working with that lift. With that being said, I still have certain pillars of a training program as far as exercise selection goes. Like I always want to see a deadlift variation. I always want to see a squat variation. I always want to see some sort of bench press variation, even though in my opinion for pressing there's much more leeway as far as exercise selection goes than, for example, squatting or deadlifting. I always want to see a rowing variation, whether that's chest supported one or a free weight row. I want to see all these things in a program, and depending on a person, we can just like cycle these lifts out depending on what we actually need for the current program. If we're working on a weakness, if we're just maintaining, different things like that. Yeah.
Really cool. And actually you mentioned about certain machines having given kind of resistance profiles and kind of resistance profile strength curves. These have become ever more popular recently, and kind of, I think they're being used by some advanced guys in a very clever and kind of good way. And I think it's, unfortunately, just like probably both of us looked at Flex magazine and copied the routines of those guys, and they just weren't for us. Some younger guys or less advanced guys are trying to use these ideas and kind of misapplying them. But how much of this do you apply in your own training? Kind of the idea of maybe manipulating resistance curves with like bands and stuff like that. And what are your general thoughts behind that idea? Because I think it's probably, there's obviously no real research on it. It's more just of a kind of theoretical idea based off kind of some physiology, I guess.
Yeah, so we have different machines at the gym. We have machines from over 30 manufacturers at the gym. So we have a diverse pool of different machines. And some of these machines are designed so they have a resistance curve that is matching your natural strength curve. And this is one of the things, and I often mention this to clients, this is something that sounds so great, right? It sounds amazing, like everything is matched. But we have to just think about stuff like resistance profiles in a very critical way, in my opinion, because if that stuff is really the end-all be-all of optimizing how we move and how we resistance train, then people who always and only use free weight exercise would have never grown to the degree they did. So I think all that stuff is fine and well, and pushing that forward is very important, like having different attachments, having different machines with matching resistance profiles, all that stuff. But I think the basics won't change. The basics will always be there, and they will always be part of smart training programming. And like I said, you have to think differently about certain machines. Like I'm very particular when I say, for example, a chest press machine. I really want to know what kind of chest press machine a client has at his gym if I don't know the gym. Like I have clients send me pictures or videos of the gym, so I know, okay, it's from this manufacturer. And 90% of the machines I've used myself, so I know how it feels. I know what the profile is and all that stuff. Because what I've noticed as far as resistance profiles go, you're going to capture a lot more tension across the entire range of motion. Meaning one set is also much more, in most cases, much more taxing on your recovery than, for example, ironically, a free weight exercise. So I'm not saying a deadlift variation is less or more taxing than a chest press, but if you're matching a resistance profile and every degree of the joint range of motion is being challenged, that can cause issues, not just as far as your recovery goes, but also as joint integrity, for example, goes. I've had numerous clients train on different gyms, at different machines at the gym, where the resistance profile was very even. So you're being challenged from the bottom up all the way to the top. And all of them reported shoulder issues within 2 or 3 weeks. You don't have that with most free weight exercise, because there's this distinct sticking point. And once you push through that wall, you're basically free to go. It's very easy at the top. It's very easy at the bottom, wherever it may be. So while all of this sounds great, we have to be very careful when we look at these machines and all these new inventions. I think it's great that the industry is trying to push things forward here, but we have to take it with a pinch of salt and be very critical and very skeptical of these things.
Fantastic. And on that line of thought, actually, like you said, you've got a huge number of machines available, but you still like the big barbell basics. What's your opinion on kind of, if you do have one, but when you think about kind of barbells versus machines, how do you go about programming for someone in that way?
I think free weight should always be the basis of your programming, simply because, first of all, these lifts, we know that they give you the most bang for your buck. That's number one. Number two, they require some technical proficiency to actually learn. You have to learn about execution with a free weight exercise. There's no guiding you. You have to learn the lift. And so you constantly have to work on that. Just because, if you're getting lazy with your squatting technique, that will show within a few weeks. That will show within a few months. And maybe then you train heavy enough or are strong enough that the weights might injure you. So you don't want that. At the same time, I think machines can be used very intelligently within a training program. For example, if I have a client who has a very hard time feeling a certain muscle group. Not saying that's the end all be all of training for hypertrophy, but it can be valuable to feel a target muscle. Then we might start with a machine actually, where we have a guided path, a guided movement, and really focus through pauses or tempo work on that particular target muscle. And after that, we go into a free weight exercise where we then again try to use what we just learned through that guided motion and transfer it into a free weight exercise. There's different things, different means you can use that. But another thing would be just general fatigue management. If you have an exercise that taxes your entire lower body, let's take the squat, and after that you're not as stable as you were before because you're just fatigued, well, then you jump on the lying leg curl, you jump on a leg press, because afterwards you can just do more sets on that equipment without the risk of getting injured with another free weight exercise.
Fantastic. Yeah, kind of and I'm of the same opinion, the kind of big compound lifts form the foundation, and then you kind of fill the holes with kind of the machine work a little bit and maybe isolation work in that case. So I think that's very well said, and I've taken a lot away from this interview, Valentin, and I think the audience will as well. If they want to learn more from you, if they potentially want to get coached by you, where should they reach out?
There's basically two destinations. It's either my website, that's valentintambosi.com, just my entire name all the way through, no underscores, no dots. And the other one will be my Instagram, which is just Valentin Tambosi. And yeah, if you're interested, just reach out.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that's all linked below. I want to say a massive thank you again to Val for coming on, and I'm sure the audience are all very happy as well. So thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me, Steve. Thank you.
So I'm Steve Hall, founder of Revive Stronger and a coach of Revive Stronger.
My name is Pascal Flor. I'm the co-owner of Revive Stronger and also a coach, of course.
Revive Stronger has probably been going solidly for 3 years, roughly about 3 years.
Revive Stronger, to me, it is becoming kind of my child, my foster child. It's the gathering and getting together of like-minded people.
We've been expanding the coaching team, which is helping us help more people, but each coach can only help a certain number of people.
Right now, it's all over the place. We have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, but there isn't that community aspect behind that.
And so the next step for us is developing a membership site.
So basically, we want to create a family and a community that is then benefiting from another.
A really cool community for people within our little niche is going to be a website.
They will get early access to our podcast.
You can access us, ask us questions.
The community aspect, we have a forum there. You can ask questions, but also you can log your journey.
There's also going to be courses on there.
Courses, presentations on different topics. Discount of past seminar footage. We will log our journey as well. We'll start vlogging.
We're going to have documentaries.
Our entire athletic journey. Furthermore, they get access to an exercise video library.
the exercises that we love for hypertrophy and maximizing hypertrophy. We're going to go through those in depth, telling you how to execute them.
We kept them concise and also mobile friendly so that you can watch them in between your sets.
I'm super excited to grow this community. The amount of value that we're going to be delivering is huge, and I'd love you to be part of it.
You will get so much out of that.
I'll see you inside.